Hi, welcome to another one of our vlogs about the say-do gap. Why is it that people often say one thing and end up doing another thing? Well, today I want to talk about something that you've probably never heard of, but you would have definitely heard about some of the things that it is responsible for. And this phenomenon is called ideomotor action. So, tell you a little story. A few years ago I went to a science festival, and there were the kind of people there you'd expect who would be there. The sort of the local university departments had turned up, like the physics department, the chemistry department, and there were a few local businesses as well who sort of were science-based, like engineering firms and sort of science-based firms. But the one that intrigued me and rather irritated me, because it was a science festival, was the local water company had turned up. And basically they were on a stand, and there was a guy there with a bucket of water and these. And what he was doing, he was showing people that if they put these over the bucket of water, they crossed. And when they went away, they came back again. And this kind of irritated me, because as a psychologist who studied the non-conscious processing a lot, I knew exactly what was causing that and what was responsible for that happening. Because of course, we're talking about water divining, and there are people out there who are huge fans of this, and they really believe that they can find things using this methodology. But I knew that this is actually an effect of ideomotor action. Okay, so what is ideomotor action? Well, you can do this at home. If you get a pendulum and you hold it out at arm's length, and then you kind of imagine it going in a circle, like anti-clockwise, you'll find it suddenly starts going in that direction. But what's intriguing about this is that you don't have any conscious experience of actually causing that effect. And so even though the physics dictates that it can only be you that's actually making it go around in that circle, you don't actually have any conscious experience of that happening. And this is exactly what happens with divining, is that it takes a very, very small twist of the hands for that to happen. And you can't consciously perceive that. Quite often you can't consciously perceive it. So it does feel like there's some external force at work. But actually it's you doing it all of the time. And no matter what diviners say, as soon as you put water divining into any kind of experimental sort of empirical study, it always fails. And there's a whole other vlog I could do on the how people manage to convince themselves, even when they're shown it fails miserably, that they try and keep this kind of constant view that it does still actually work. But that's probably for another time. So I kind of objected to this divining being at this science festival, and I got into a little bit of trouble talking to the diviner and the people who organised it. But I was trying to explain that there is a very well-known phenomenon that caused it. And it causes other things as well, because the other one that it is responsible for, this ideomotor action causes, is of course the Ouija board. Now, this has been around for a very long time, was very popular with the kind of spiritualist movement back in the Victorian days and the idea is, I'm sure you know, but if people gather around on a table, they all put their hands on the pointer in the middle and they kind of move it around like this, and it spells things out, and you can say yes and you can say no. And of course you don't have the experience of actually anybody moving it, but of course it's usually the whole group who are doing something, but they don't consciously have any experience of them actually causing that movement, even though they do. But this kind of brings me on to probably my favorite experiment, psychological experiment, that I've come across in the last few years, because some rather interesting Canadian psychologists decided that what they would do is they would see if they could get people to express knowledge through ideomotor action. How did they do that? Well, they invited people along and they said, okay, we're going to get you to play with the Ouija board, and there's going to be two of you, and what you're going to do is you're going to have one person one side of the table, another person the other side of the table, and you're both going to hold the pointer, but we're going to blindfold you so you can't see what's going on. But of course actually what the experiment was is that one of the people invited was a stooge and was known to the experimenter, and so as soon as the blindfolds came on, they took their hands off. So you ended up with one person sitting at a table holding this pointer like this, blindfolded, not realizing that they were the only person holding the pointer. Then under these conditions, they were asked questions. And there were yes, no answers, so they moved one way to yes and one way to no. And when they finished, they sort of were debriefed and they had this explained to them what was going on and what the intention of the experiment was. And many of them kind of picked up that the pointer were looking for the motor underneath because they genuinely felt this thing moving around, and they had no conscious experience at all of the fact that they were the person or they were the thing that was moving it. But what was most intriguing about this is that when they were answering questions they were confident of and they knew the answer to, they performed the same level as a control group who were just asked the questions directly. However, when they weren't sure about the questions, they were unsure of the answer, they were actually significantly more accurate responding using this Ideomotor action than the control group who were responding consciously. Which is a really intriguing thing. It sort of says that basically when people feel they're not in control of the answer, they're actually more accurate sometimes. Why is this the case? Well, it's probably best to think of it as being the way in which we kind of answer questions. Sometimes if we're not sure, which in research we often ask people questions that they're not sure of. And so we do have to kind of ask them to give us answers of which they have very little confidence over. But when they do that, actually answering intuitively is probably the best thing to do, rather than getting people to directly respond and try and think it through, because you end up overthinking it. So actually our gut feel sometimes is way more accurate than when we try and engage our conscious mind and try and think things through. So when we're doing research, consumer research, it's easier to get people to overthink things, and that's just going to increase the inaccuracy of the answer that we get. And actually getting people to respond intuitively is far more accurate. This is why, of course, we use our augmented and virtual reality solutions to get people to respond intuitively in that moment, in that instant, and capture that data, because that ends up giving us a much more predictive response than getting people to consciously introspect and think things through. Because quite honestly, people can just overthink and get the wrong answer. Well, thank you very much indeed for listening, and I hope you join me for another talk at some point soon. Thank you.